It's early. I got up too early. I heard a bunch of noise out in the little alleyway back here, and then my eye from this melatonin just started to itch and hurt. And this has like been an ongoing theme for some years now. I'm not sure if it's dry eye, but as I like pick through my eye for a good hour, I'm pulling out like dust, and it seems to just happen in this eye. Anyway, I went to sleep listening to this very compelling, I think it's called Vocation, with Maddie, an interview with Michael Tsarion that was based on the female Illuminati, which this is not a new theme with Michael Tsarion. This is something he's been talking about for quite a while. Years ago, I had stopped listening to him, ironically, strangely, because I thought he was going in a completely different direction from the reality that I was experiencing, from the unfoldment of what's really going on in the world through my own acquisition, investigation, and discovery. And it turned out that he was even more hardcore in this specific dialogue, which I found in the interview that I watched yesterday. I can't give you a reference number or like the episode number. Sometimes they'll be good enough to tag that along. I think there's been so many interviews on that particular channel that but Michael is so good at speaking his truth, speaking his side, and academically referencing back to and citing materials to the best of his ability. I haven't really seen that many people that have outright sort of challenged him, and I think that would be when you're coming out with such bold information. You're either going to espouse to a particular learning model or a mode of thinking that puts you in line with like esoteric traditions, which he's definitely, admittedly, that's part of what he campaigns. But the other things that he's talking about, and this channel does the same type of discourse. My blog is focused on exactly the same revelations, right? Revealing the occulted truth, the information. But there's also middle-aged man syndrome, right? Which, playing, like, I'm not gonna say playing the devil's advocate, but kind of coming from another perspective is where many people have criticized me. Like, nobody has a problem laying out criticism for me. Like, in the past, the most benign statement is like, what's up with the earphones? It's called, I'm recording my voice, but people will have gripes, and they'll pick certain things apart. And I would say that this is akin to like these videos where you see these very poor, oaky type looking people, getting into these sort of War of the Roses, police body cam footage videos that end up in somebody dying. And that if they could afford a bigger wall, if they had more sway in their community, if they were dressed differently. By the way, I've got more than one of these gray shirts here. Looks like I'm wearing the same shirt every single day. I rotate them. I like the gray. Kind of goes with my gray. Right? So Michael is getting into some really heated territory. So again, if you were to like criticize him from a low IQ perspective, like Maddie says, right, which I oftentimes feel like Michael aligning himself with that particular mode of thought of that person and what their motive seems to be behind the channel and how Maddie himself thinks. I'm not that impressed with him, but I do appreciate him keeping himself quiet as he goes about the interview process, and that's what Michael Tsarion seems to expect from people, right? And so there's this sort of diatribe or dialogue that seems to occur. And if you like what Michael says, great. If you don't, there's not going to be much more of a variance in the formatting. You see that across the board with all these different people that he regularly, maybe interview is the wrong, but it does seem like there's a lack in personalization when he's talking about such personal issues. And one of those main personal issues would be, again, this female Illuminati, which, let's give Michael credit, other than wearing the dark shades all the time, which is probably because he's staring at a screen, mainly one of the reasons, right? And he's got a good polarization going on there, right? To where he's not optically stressing his eyes out. I've often thought, something that looks like something might have even happened to Michael. And then another thought that came upon me is that all his talk of practitionership, the magician, the mystic, and all the other territories that he tends to cover is that, and his fascination with the tarot, and I think he even has his own tarot deck that he could come out with, that there's a wrestling that's happening here where he wants to enjoy life. He, like myself, wants a reason to trust the ocean beneath him, the volatility of the people and society. But at the same time, what holds him back is that he doesn't even have to go into this investigation to see it, so poignantly before his face every single day in this occultation of power structures and orders, and the fact that as groups of people, particularly women and the women's suffrage movement, when you're kind of looking 100 plus years back and seeing this evolution take place that really turned into this feminist push. And many say that this is directly connected with CIA operations, right, to create entropy and discord in particular pocketed regions. And then, of course, emergent would be people like Ayn Rand, Karen Horney, and many others. I mentioned Isbit, who really railed against this whole Dewey Decimal washover as to show how systematically the scholastic system was dumbing kids down. And what Michael has done is he's really opened up a can of worms where there's so many people that could easily use societal norms and standards that are in the Spanish language, for God's sake, when you have all these feminine sayings and word chunks and batching that place this sort of strange reverence back to this gravity well of God hail the queen type of thing, or all the effervescence of communism that you see. But I'm very impressed actually studying Spanish and probably only being about 1/3 the way through to actually being able to fluently, or approach fluency on any level, approaching a B1. I got to say that I'm impressed by the scientific and punctilio ductilio aspects of how the Spanish speaker collects themselves, expresses themselves, and the reverence toward rational information. Right? It doesn't appear that way from the outside when you think that you understand what people are, the dialectic and the dialogue that's being exchanged with people from on an everyday sort of colloquial mechanistic account. I think what English speakers, particularly low IQ, low educated English speakers that observe what they think are just your typical Mexican or Spanish dialectics or dialogue, right, where it's kind of like you get used to the sound but you have no idea what they're talking about. I think the assumption of what these conversations entail create this disharmonic sort of fog, right, of enubilation that your typical American thinks that Hispanic people are much less intelligent than they actually are. And Spanish speakers are aware of this too, because just understanding and being educated in the verb variance gives a completely, like, English speakers don't have that, right? Your typical person, if you just go around like a larger metropolitan area like Sacramento, they don't. I mean, when you're talking about ebonics or like more colloquial type, I mean, people absolutely unanimously don't even have a minor grasp on the English language, right? And so this does go back to, Isbit. She really looks strongly at this, and there's a lot of interviews. I've got a good playlist down below if you want to check that out. Isbit, I think it is. We'll look for that, just a breakdown of the scholastic school system, the education system, and how. So, like, she worked, I think, during the Reagan era on the high in the academic secretarial level in education, and so she got a first-hand view, a look at how these not so clandestine operations are taking place, right? Like, why do certain things happen? And so, showing reference toward the scientist, it's very popular right now to break down the scientific mechanism of thought, dispel it, laugh at it, even though these are the only people that are turning assumptive, dangerous collections, batches of information upside down and saying this just doesn't correlate, And I have a very interesting take, and I wish that I could more perspicaciously be looking at this under a rushlight all the time. When I look at and listen to, over the years, many years now actually, Ben Gortzel, kind of following his persona, his personality, his train of thought, and finding it very compelling and interesting, all the different things that he's into. But then seeing him also, not to put him on the spot, but I mean, I'm put on the spot. I'm going to be 57 years old, and it's like, I think Ben's just got a couple of years on me, and I think Michael Tsarion might be around the same age as Ben Gortzel, so pushing 60, right? And it's a science, it's a personal science to go through observation and to see this. And I've written articles on EPL. EPL is doing amazingly great. I don't get paid anything. I've tried to get monetized for EPL because of the traffic is just globally insane. Like for a blog, it's pretty soon it's going to be pushing 600,000 views, and this is a blog where people come here to read the information, right? Sometimes I'll put up YouTube links and things like that, but it's pretty rare. Something that YouTube's done, or at least people have caught on to this, and for some reason I can't post certain videos that I would really like to share that go along with the entire string of thought of EPL and what it represents. And I'm not going to get into breaking that down, but the main principles that are beyond tenets. I've gotten less maybe pietist and dogmatic with the whole thing as I've gotten older as well, where you realize, this whole God is dead. You're going to go through this grievance in many different ways if you approach with a mature mind. That this is not just an occurrence that takes place, but that the death of God is something that happens and was teleologically planted in you as a sort of acquisition point, right? A catch and capture stage where whatever you had readied yourself for, however you had sort of the sepulchre, you had prepared yourself through traditions and ritual for a particular moment. And I wrote about this years ago, was that, in a very crude, rudimentary way, like you turn on the supercomputer discovers that no, Jesus never existed, there is no God, and we kind of live in this rhetorical trap that we absolutely could never escape from. And of course, life is all about these futile efforts of escapism. And some of us think early on we can escape with alcohol. Some of us think that we can escape by taking on a certain youthful persona. We're going to be the exercise scientist. We're going to be the personal trainer. We're going to be out there on the road being, an avid cyclist. We're going to be a nature freak. We're going to be a vegan. But as you get older, you realize that these things, there's a predetermined process where your body, and this brushes up against Michael Levin, we'll get into that, but that your body can only assimilate and process so many nutrients at a given time, and that much of this comes down to your genetics. And when you look in the mirror, you see the same floppy skin. What was it, matrophobia, where that Michael brought up in his last interview, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I think I put actually the description of that in the post, so I'll go look at that again. But it was late when I looked that up and when I've finally been able to listen to the entire interview. And I'll tell you, there's never a time where I can't listen to the whole damn interview with Michael. Like, if it sounds like I've been kind of brushing up against just like wanting to criticize him, I've been seeing the need to do that because the information is so important, and I see the cancel culture constantly looking at his heels. I mean, even like Wikipedia, Jason Reza Giorgiani is similar as far as this niche information, but he's very open to like jumping into the pool, right? In order, like, in other words, he often knows that he's stretching certain claims, and he'll go with that, right? Whereas if Michael makes a claim, you'll watch him over the years, and he will have to go. And I'm not saying that Jason's not a good investigator or that he's, he lacks academically on any scale or any level, but his political polarization and his passions for Iran and oftentimes cloud over everything else that he's doing, right? But then you have to look at the compelling aspect of the argument that, well, isn't it the cradle of life, that area of the Middle East, right? These constant wars, when you're talking about Palestine, when you talk about the connections with everything, and Michael gets into this, he talks about the origins and the histories and the connections with Egypt. Ralph Ellis gets very much into this, and even looking at Ireland and the burial of some very notable figures, right? But the odd trail is the same thing that I had noticed. I think I've seen it my whole life, where I see one behavior as it's put forth, and as a definite immutable behavior model, right? Or module, because you're looking at the process, the application, and the flow through this mechanical energetic system. But that the idea of a female in society, the idea of a male in society, the idea of a child, is such a thin veneer that the movie industry, this gets into Slavoj Žižek and some other things, because there's parallels all around here, right? But how much of this information, this disparate aspect to the male and female, are truly embedded in our genetics? Like Michael Tsarion will just say, it's in your unconscious, right? He doesn't even give reference to like subconscious or subthoughts, but those things are awareness of this separation, this disparate measure, this female Illuminati, and this protection of the Jewish people that is really unwarranted. Like it's almost like the popularity to be anti-Semitic, right, and then to go the other way and try to be somewhat apologetic, right? And it's like, why kiss the ass of something that shouldn't exist in the first place? Like, have you forgotten the Talmud, right? Have you forgotten the Kabbalistic bullshit, right? Have you forgotten what these people really believe? But then you have to look at the intricacies and the details, and then the very cursory view that most people that back a religion are merely just born into it, and then they get to work, and they're not really aware of all the nepotism and so forth. Like, one of the biggest ways we're manipulated, obviously, is through language models, right? Where not only are we doing it to ourselves, speaking a certain idiom within our own family unit or family structure, the people we know, and really alienating other people, but also doing that to protect ourselves. And that's where the dress, culturally further distinguishes and differentiates. And then from a street perspective, from a hood perspective, it's like you have this intelligence of, like when you look at Ebonics and the connection with how they'll take on the people in these ghettos, right? Will take on certain behaviors because they're watching everybody else and they're going uniform, gang. It's a gang. Dialectical speech pattern. It's euphemistic scientific terms of code, right? And then symbol, flag, right? So you can see how they're being an uprising. It's like, we're going to have our own damn flag. We're going to take up our own damn guns. Where's my fucking culture? Now you see how food and dance and music comes into it. It's like there's a natural migration through language models that teleologically, like an acorn, unlocks the depth, the richness, and the structure. You could say of hierarchy, but it's really about filling in the sphere, completing. But here we are, incomplete. Here we are, something's missing, right? So we press toward this religion. We press toward something to believe in. And the thing that I noticed years ago that eludes everyone, like when I say everyone, I'm talking about from an academic perspective, the science, any type of scientific investigation. Well, they don't regard principles. They'll look at first principles from a sort of mathematical sense. They'll look at double-blind studies, infrared reliability studies. They'll look at this, and they'll say, oh, it has to be done this way. But then when this non-secular thought process comes about, and there's this approach of, well, what if we do just the opposite? And it's kind of like, oh yeah, let's name that, right? Let's go antithetical. So when somebody that's seen as a maverick or a renegade or sort of a Renaissance type of a person that's going to come in and reform the dogma into a more secular science, well, this is taking place all the time, but it opens the door for corruption and aberrant behavior to where there isn't a distinct parameter that's set forth through main principles that are beyond moral fortitude, like virtue signaling, morality, moral objection, and then principles versus principalities, where people really just get lost in this area, where they walk away either godless or they walk away seeming to be pietous because they're going to believe in a very short-sighted rendition or version of their God, right? My God doesn't have to extend into all areas. I just accept it, right? And it's like, well, your God has to extend into all these areas, and you're going to have to explain how the fuck that is, right? How do all these fingers and all these arms reach in? Because the Bible, through traditions, is trying to do this, trying to espouse to this, and does a very poor job at doing that because it flips on its own methodology, right? It'll begin to use something, and I'm not going to come up with any examples because it's fucking boring. It's droll. I hate the Bible. I think the Bible is a ridiculous piece of literature, and it's really the only thing that really supports or acts as is giving some sort of cursory reference to historical happenings. But as people who really look into this and do these investigations, like Ralph Ellis, you're about 50 years off. Why is that? And then you start to see this intentional, and this sort of supplication and masking over again back into this sort of female Illuminati conceptualization with the connections with the Vatican, the Knights of Malta, and going in and routing into the Rosicrucians and the Eastern Stars, the female Masonic traditions, and how females like behind. So why would they follow this woman, right? And then you start to look at it and you go, well, because she just sucked off this 7-foot giant standing behind her, and he's so love bombed by her, and this really does get into Mother Circe and many other areas that you could look at, either historically or euphemistically, passed down to these sort of traditions, like the Morai, right, the three witches. But and the thing that I like about Michael Tsarion is he acknowledges that witchcraft is very real, right? So I believe that I've heard a lot of discussions about the Salem witch trials, the number of people, the males that were involved in this whole thing. There was like four of them, which is false accusers, false accusations. I think were thrown on the majority of those people. I think it was to target one specific, probably very powerful and influential witch, and to sort of mix up the cauldron, mix up the pot, sort of change the axis of power there, the things that people really don't see that truly work and act as a hub or a central artery that offers the motivation and the blood supply, the life. And Michael skirts around this quite a bit, but it's undeniable when you look at the rights, that supposedly the women's suffrage movement brought about, when we're looking at abortion rights to your own body, and then when people, sort of recoil back into their abode, no longer attached in the coitus of conversation, into this dialectic that's being exchanged out here, as if the Senate has any say over how somebody parties on the weekend. I can tell you from my own personal experience, all the people that I would take picking up the foul-mouthed people and what they're really doing when I would drive late at night around the Bay Area, doing Uber and Lyft. I would drive around Sacramento, all over the place. A lot of times I just couldn't sleep, so I'd just get up and I would drive in the middle of the night. And from the homosexuals, the parties that happen there, to these just average, everyday, working, slutty-ass groups of women and disgusting, foul-mouthed people, it gives you a real bird's-eye view that you would never think that in America, especially, the human quality of the human condition was so base, but it is extremely base. You could say, oh, people are on their worst behavior and they're just trying to get attention. And from a more of a psychological aspect, I would say no. From my experience, my long life experience, I would say that when people are letting one out, they're no longer putting up their guard, they're drunk, they're high, or they're really expressing what's really going on. And it's a very thin veneer between what they propose themselves to be and that rage, right? You can see it in people's eyes, you can hear it in their voice. In some respects, in the workplace, they're even more abrasive because they think they can get away with it, right? But taking people to Planned Parenthood, that was one of the hardest things that I had to do, especially as people are like picketing outside. And when you think that, oh, this is a right that we all have, like, you can't do that. And the female says, oh yeah, watch me. You can yell at me, you can shame me, but I'm a product of this sacrificial society where I'm supposed to go through the ritualistic act. We don't see it. We don't see how the club and the trance music and the binaural beats and the flashing lights, right? And the whole atmosphere and the name of the street and where it's placed and the advertising of the nightclub, right? We don't see that this is a fucking temple that we're going into, and that the process, the whole thing is, it's a meat market, as it's been called. This is 100% to get into this sort of rhythmic, sensual, sexual dance that causes a percolation of the glandular systems, right? To go into this excretion, right? This HPTA readying sense, pleasure, pain, level of limbic system, amygdala awareness, right? Of violence and sex and procreation and impregnation and sacrifice, right? So many people don't realize that, the biggest aspect of the witch is the fact that it doesn't take much to collect and capture the essence of the male, his entire male line, right? It seems so trivial. The commercials are pushing it, the movies are pushing it. Why not just, quickly have sex with this woman, have sex with that woman? And you don't realize that just that penetration in that singular moment, that's all it would take, right? For that transfer of genetic material to intentionally impregnate the ovulating body of the witch and the mind that's behind the acquisition, right? So people can get cursed when they have impregnated someone and then they sacrifice to Columbia or the Statue of Liberty or back to the state, right? So the state will take care of me. I'm going to sacrifice something from in me. It's a part of me, right? So this gets into some really crude notions, but Michael has gotten into this in other discussions where he's talked about the menstrual blood being used in rituals, drinking of the menstrual blood in specific rituals. And then even more so, when you get into this and you see the depictions of these stories, the intentional impregnation and either a birth or an abortion at a specific stage, the consumption of the placenta, Zach King talks about this, about the rituals that were being done. There's not enough people that come forward that have actually been so hardcore into these ages old, right? Nicholas Schreck, Zena Schreck, LeVay, they don't get so deep into this, and I'm not sure. Well, I do think that they're, I think that that they have done enough rituals themselves to where they know what you can feel it, what they're channeling, what they're into, and a sort of leveling system with a certain practitionership, right? That they have sort of earned their way into, and through these occult ceremonies that have aligned them with specific sages over the eons, right? Or at least over the established recorded history of magic and magical rituals under a certain header of practitionership, right? Let's just say, like, you have Satanism, you have different sects of Judaism that are 100% doing rituals that employing rituals where the fetal consumption cycle. So when you get down to it, it's like for the woman to realize this is just a growth in my body. It's something that's happening to me that was given to me. You can't say that my aspects of my body don't belong to me, right? I feed it, I sleep at certain times, I eat in order to nourish myself and stay alive. And now something like you could say like a cancer, right? Or you could say like an offering, a stem cell, something alive and burgeoning, right? Is alive. Well, I can take it out and I can feed it to the crows. I can feed this fetus, and I can take the placenta and I can use the blood in rituals, specific rituals for specific purposes in order to keep my ass alive, right? And these cymatic harmonics reach a certain tone or tonality that connects. This is rare, right? How many people around the world are doing these rituals at any given time? There's probably gaps where nobody does it around the world for long periods of time, but when certain rituals are employed that are extremely similar, the same type of patterning or cymatic tonality keeps this sort of perennial patronage alive, even though it's humming and skipping at a far lesser algorithmic tone or beat, right? You're looking at something that's over aeons of time, right? So the missing thing that's talked around is the fact that you could have gripes about the number of abortions and the number of kids that are happening, and then just a miscarriage is a terrible thing, and then just say from a cursory perspective, well, that's it. But what we know about people, and what I personally know, I mean, I could say going back to even as far back as when I was a teenager, I remember the most foul conversations happening where a woman would have miscarriages, in the toilet because she was such a slut, and she was doing so many disgusting things that it was like common for her to sleep with everybody in the entire kitchen, and to constantly have that type of discharge and so forth in the bathroom. It was just like to be exposed to that type of environment is, it's riveting, right? But it's life, and it's the truth. And so when a woman is by herself, when she's alone, when she has gone through the process of this and done this absorption of another person's energy, the smallest amount of seminal fluid, the smallest amount of semen carries, like, it's a lesson, right? That you don't do that because you're losing something, and you're not just losing it; it's your entire lineage, right? So many people don't realize why these familiar curses stand the test of time, and it's the rarity of these rituals, right? It's the rarity of these rituals and the information through networking that is involved in the identification and the descriptor under the light of the sun, under the process and the precession of the stars. It recognized that your sperm is in that other person, and that it caused a pregnancy of another life form, right? And she is not only sacrificing that male that she'll never see again, right? But she may collect a hair, she may get a picture, she may really try to embed in herself a memory in your worst behavior when you were just like drunk and gripping and grasping and saying, no, that's how I see you, that's who you are. And this moment is solidified by this act. I sacrifice you and your family for me, my health, and for this for women's kind, right? Nietzsche really does get into this, when he's talking about under her dress and finery, and he uses that term. I'll never forget that as an opening, supposing truth is a woman, and to look at this and go, wow, this is the blatant, ugly truth that in the throngs of war, in the terrible, cold aspects of Ukrainian, Russian famine and poverty, where it was made legal to eat your own children just to stay alive, and that there's those harrowing pictures of people who chopped up their own little kids, and their body parts are just sitting there cold like slabs on a table, poorly cut, to where they're actually selling parts of their children just to be able to have enough to get by, probably to be able to buy meager or do trade, for other foods. So the practitioner understands that this time, the illusion of Starbucks, the illusion of society, the illusion of convenience and comfort, that those things are not, from a perennial perspective, are not expected at any point, and that if they do occur, that they are occurring in the heated throngs of war as a method or a means at acquisitioning, and that is what's happened here. Like when we talk about spiritual warfare or a battlefield of the mind, what's really taking place is something that we're all extremely aware of, right? So I wanted to approach that probably from a completely different perspective or a completely different standpoint, but that like an animal being slaughtered, every bit of that animal needs to be used, right? in the most pragmatic and practical sense. And the same thing holds true with these rituals, right? Unless there is a discarding type of a ritual that's going on here, right? So when you just go have an abortion, or you or you sleep with somebody who just speaks of witchcraft, you have to understand the energetics that are behind from a cybernetic sense, where everyone in our society is poorly developed for a very good reason, and that is that human intelligence and conscious development took place in another time, another era that we wouldn't even believe existed if we saw it with our own eyes, right? Other worlds, other realms, where the imagination became the truth, where the adamant belief and backing by physical means allowed these principalities to rise and to stay in power, and that many of them never lost power or went out of power, and that this gauntlet was passed by those people who would investigate within themselves and unfold the most hardcore human truths. That we are extremely cosmically very scary, strange, and bizarre, and esoteric-minded animals, and that when we use terms like secular science or academics, when you look at the origins of where they come from, all the way to we want to say what's the most pure rocket science or this and that, and it's like, well, you have the Grecian fire, right? And you have this you have the Crowley-esque meets L. Ron Hubbard meets Jack Parsons summoning, right? In science, you have at the top of their game, you have people who resurrect altars. When you're talking about CERN, you're talking about these strange, bizarre dances where you can say, oh, they're trying to move like quarks or neutrinos, and it's kind of like, no, it's beginning to, and then they're wearing their masks, and then they're hailing to the Bhagavad Gita, and they've got these statues of Vishnu, and it's like, wait, what the fuck's going on here? And you realize, or what's really going on behind the scenes with these Protestants or Catholics, right? All the molestation or all the theft, the franchising on other people's grief. It's kind of like, there's this test: are you going to jump into the infinity pool? Are you going to jump into the pool? And that was a weird ass movie, but are you going to jump into the pool and survive? Right? Are you going to keep your skin alive? You're going to keep your family lineage alive and play the game, or are you going to be marked out, and someone else is going to take up the space and the air and the food that you are, because a lot has been put into you. All the food you've eaten, all the air you breathe in. Well, you have to become a junction point or a conduit for what has already been happening, the capitalistic enslavement. You didn't invent it. Wasn't your fault. You're not going to be able to stop it. You got to survive. A girl's got to eat sort of statement, right? So, in summary, I just want to leave you with the hard fact that these fetuses, these embryos, are being consumed. But they are being consumed because these practitioners believe that this is their property. It's happening in their bodies. It's happening of their person. And this is, and when a woman thinks that she's sort of taking on this sort of witchcraft practice or energy, but she's doing it in a very shallow and cursory sort of way, where she's only going about the energetic work, but she's not actually going so hardcore as to consume the fetus to utilize the placenta. It gets to that sort of stage in afterbirth and so forth, and she's going to capture the blood, because she's signifying a time and a moment. If she's not connecting with nature, feeding nature the fetus, preparing a banquet for nature of herself, a connection of herself. And so this is the thing that's talked around. This is the ritual that's missing, right? This is the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. And all the way from Michael Aquino to Wicker Man to Jesus being hung on the cross, these are all signified as the ritual, the sacrifice of a life for a life. And if you can think about somebody who really takes this to an extreme, and there are many, to where you'll see somebody who is, you're not even aware that they're, somebody looks pregnant. They always look like they were just pregnant. That's the way they look. They must have a strange body, or right. And it's like, you have no idea how often, especially when they begin to get this down and see the method, right, and turn this into a method. You wouldn't believe the type of information that's being exchanged on the internet that's allowing black magic, right, to take place. But this isn't even considered black magic. It might even be considered like white magic, right? Because technically nobody is being hurt. It's nobody that has a name. It's nobody that has a social security number. It's nobody who's ever going to be registered. Thousands upon thousands. When you're talking about Dave Paulides and missing people reports, look at all the people that are missing that you never even knew were conceived or existed on any scale, right? So, in essence, it's to keep this elemental, forever dreaming spirit in play. These mimetic sequences, from more of a mathematical perspective, to say that the teleological life, right, and the potential and the possibilities would be, you could say it's snuffed and it's just done, it's cut short, and it's like, no, that's not how the witch sees it. The witch is taking the effervescence and the energy and putting it into ritualization, and that shit's working. It's not only giving her this rosy look that brings even more customers to the cart, even more men now want to be cursed by Mother Circe. They want to freely give up their genetics and be cursed for a little, a conceptualization of a piece of ass. So you wonder why, why this pejorative idea of men being just these dumbasses with boners that would walk off a cliffside and can be so easily convinced to turn on their own best friend for conceptualization of a piece of ass, right? Well, this is the hot house that we live in, right? And so, again, no part is wasted. The ritualization of acquisitioning, taking on, and absorbing this energy is the goal. And it's backed by cults and covens, coteries, that when you're talking about these hardcore truths, that this isn't just a ritual, this is 100% an aspect of the collection of completion of what the seasons are, of what life is, of what the cycle is, right? And the cycles, and to keep the cycles going. So then you have such an influence on the volatility of the cycles and the expectation of these sacrifices and this demand for sacrifice, right? That when people want to forensically, try to reduce this to mere, I think thermodynamics is a cover-up, personally, and I think definitely that taking the ether out of the material or the materium that is being looked at and studied was a huge intentional error, a huge intentional mistake, and then just sort of like pass this off as plasma, right? Because that cuts short all phenomenology that is just thrown into this huge, ever-increasing bucket of the unexplainable. And it can be explained, and it's a very uncomfortable explanation. And if people understood that, no, this isn't disparate and separate from the computational model. This is when you no longer think of blood as this personalized thing, but you see it more like oil or fluid or even fuel, right? And you see the human body more as a robotic, into flesh operation, and you see the cells and cell generation lives of a cell as a pre-programmed technology, but made into flesh, self-replicating in a way. And you look at it in a more technological and forensic sort of way, instead of personalizing. It gives you an idea of number subsets, memetics, number chains. It's the only way that a symbol like the inverted pentagram would have the type of power that it does. And so every 8 years, I already summarized this, but in final, every 8 years, there is a pentagram alignment with Venus. It's almost exactly every 8 years. I posted that up on community posts as well. I posted that several different times over the years. Because like Samhain and other high holidays of witchcraft, and so when you begin to see, well, what does it matter? Windows opening, and ooh, right? And now the most terrible things are happening around this time of the year, and you're looking at it, oh, I don't know, I just want to go get a gingerbread latte and chill out. I don't know what you're talking about. And you got that picture of the siren with the tentacle fucking fish. You flip upside down, you flip a Starbucks cup upside down, you'll see the face that emerges. And Sirius and Doggone and the Doggone tribe and the links and the connections with the Dog Star, Sirius A, Sirius B, this shit is very serious. And NASA takes it very serious. And NASA doesn't look past the communication put on the very signets that they take into space of these gods, and the acknowledgement of these gods, of these figures, right, as these energetic, because you have to think of it this way, and again, this is where we'll end it, is that if you were to really take systems logic and see how everything seems to function, like you can't have a language and a language will self-assemble if it is being spoken broadly, and in order for it to go into market, in order for it to be globally accepted and to flourish and to survive, it not only has to go through these verb changes, colloquializations, new pronunciations, and evolution inside of a dictionary. The symbol of a letter, a word, how it correlates to a number, having some sort of actual meaning, right? When we get back to meaning, we talk about the golden mean, and that it has to center around some sort of truth. But when you look at it, you see the same system, and this is what EPL was really all about. It's to look at the base system of reality, of what all language is based on, all expression, all systems, and through systems logic. It seems very irrational and very illogical, but that's the whole point here, is that the ether seems to be something that is heretical and illogical, but when you begin to look at it, like Amy Eskridge talked about this, she even in one of these interviews that she was giving, or talks, she said she feels that it was a mistake that the ether was actually taken away, and it was quite intentional, from the model, the material model, right? So this is very real. People are having less children. Anybody who's awake and aware should be afraid to bring a child into this environment, but that's all been the way it always is. But there's no longer this intoxicating sleep and comfort. We're not in that stage anymore. This whole comfortably numb Pink Floyd thing doesn't exist anymore. No, we're looking at the little fat piggy that is the president, right? The little Mother Circe byproduct of Mary Trump, right? The terrible, horrible demon that comes about from age-old rituals of this happening through time immemorial, right? And we're watching the shallowness, right, of how the world runs, leaving Marina Abramovic, right, looking at Trump and calling him a high-level magician. Well, no, he's not a magician or a practitioner. He's not a mystic. He is essentially like a goyim, almost like a remote control place marker, where energies, because there's nothing going on in his head or in his body, and all he ever was just this undeveloped soul, right? That he is a conduit for this type of manifestation through energetics, right? And you should be hard pressed and wary with the actions that you go through and where you put your pee-pee, right? That you aren't cursing yourself and your entire family through a process that you can't even recall the next day because you were just drunk, right? So people are having to wake up and develop a sort of spiritual awareness where they can't allow this entity, this energy to take them over. And the sad thing is that when we think that we've had any enjoyment, it was never us enjoying anything. When we think that we're laughing along with, or other people at a certain comedian, there is always a sniper event going on of cancel culture, and there's very little joy in this existence, right? And once you begin to use that extra sense and really begin to intuitively feel your way through life, and stop believing everything that you look at, that woman, that person that's standing in front of you is not who they purport themselves to be, and they never have to tell you the truth, and they will fleece white lies and do whatever because there is no God that's arbitrarily standing over them where they're going to be punished or convicted for anything. And that once the collection plate comes around, right, the deeds that you have done, that is where you plant your sperm, right, what heightened states of your own body systems, that's a whole other area that I've talked about a little bit. But once you incite energetics into certain areas and awaken aspects that are beyond your persona or your personality, that's when you begin to connect to something that is beyond. Now, we could say that one of the main things to look at is the Skene's gland, and that's something that you have to go into and investigate on your own. But that your nervous system, all these 9 layers of the human body, your nervous system acting in congruence with all other areas to this sort of through either pain or complete and total hedonistic pleasure, where you're actually conjuring energetics, or you could even say demonic energies or spiritual energies from other places and enjoying it because you're so damn bored, right? Getting into the heat of sensual and sexual perversions that from a glandular perspective, you are creating excretions. You are creating a chemical process that is now developing you into something from a spiritual sense, and you can never return back to that teleological base of who you thought you were, who you were maybe meant to be through your genetic imprinting or blueprint, that those telomeres were connecting to an electrical field, an electromagnetic field, that now there's interference, right? Now there's interference. Now there's a connection to something. And you could say, well, maybe this is the process, this development. This is more into the OTO and the Crowley type stuff, where it's like, it's inevitable. You can't avoid it. And the type of work, the great work that you have to do in order to, as you're developing this, as you're bringing this out, is to balance this and to develop higher tiers of what, like many people would say, from a practitioner sense, Crowley going through this 28-day ritual and then doing all these homosexual acts. And it's kind of like, and then, the B666 and talking about this and that. It's like, what's going on with this guy? Like, he has such reverence on one side where you have all these people, including Michael Tsarion, looking at this person like he's misunderstood. And then you begin to see the things that I'm talking about, where you have your average everyday little witch this is her goal. Like, it's not some little thing where she does it sometimes. I mean, to be pregnant, you're pregnant all day. You're not just pregnant part of the day, right? It changes all your body systems. It changes where your calories are going to, right? It changes and then the grief, the postpartum grief is also used to disparately shunt away and refute and say, I did this intentionally. And any postpartum depression that I'm going through is the codified animalistic machine within me, and I control this machine, and I decide intellectually what the fuck this body is going to produce or not produce, and it's coming from me. It's got stem cells. I'm cooking this thing up and eating it, or I'm eating it raw, right? So, things that Zach King talks about when he was talking about like this full-term abortion or killing a baby through satanic ritualistic sacrifice. Well, that is, I'm not going to say minor, but that is just the tip of the iceberg with this ritualization that gets into the red right rituals, that allows free access, right? When we talk about free access, it's you have free. So how do these people do these fantastic or phantasmic types of feats where it's been, like to say that Francis of Assisi, or other people, John Dee, many other people had experienced. Burbank, I think, is another person. Like, these demons or this energy is like literally pulling somebody off the ground and they're falling and being injured and then dying. And it's like there's serious ramifications of this. But it's or the UFOs that are talked about, or this divine female, this Hathor female that Chris Bledsoe and Jake Barber talk about, right? And the fact that they don't realize that they are warlocks, and that they are warlocks that are they're like on a chessboard, that they're called into play, and that this is the long game we're talking about, right? And that even most especially, you look at somebody like Aleister Crowley, who went through long periods of purification, where he probably wouldn't eat, he would fast, he would do all the things that were involved with purification, right? He would go through the methodology, saying, no, this is my breadth, this is my depth, right? And so when you look at, Madame Blavatsky wanting to really be entered into the masculine side, saying, I've done all the things that a male would do to get into these initiate programs. Why are you refusing me? I'm going off and doing my own thing, right? How many times has that ended up successful when people are rejected or turned away from something that's already so clandestine and evil, right? But you could argue and say, no, these are not covert operations. These aren't clandestine operations. They're happening out in front of everybody. In fact, they have, the Masons, with their little weird, or the Shriners with their little Alibaba shit, and you're watching the parade. It's like, they're not being covert. They're being very overt. They're putting it all out there, and they're saying, this is who we are. This is what we do, right? But then when you look further into it, you're like, this guy's a used car salesman. Like, I know this guy. All he does is get drunk on the weekends, and he's a horny old man, and he does whatever the hell he wants, and he jokes around and talks about Lucifer or whatever, and right. But I mean, there he goes. He's there on the weekends, smiling in this parade and giving giving to the Rotary Club or the Kiwanis Club or whatever back into the community, and then they just were involved with this drive that brought in all this money for the public school system in the area, and blah 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 blah, right? And then you have this alliance with the Christian community, and and they're all in bed together. You don't see how they're feeding back into this the system that isn't prevalent, that you do not see, that links back in with the Knights of Malta and the Vatican, and has a long history. That if you want to really get into this and the historicity, Michael Tsarion would probably be the perfect person to look into. But anyway, this is running a little long. I wanted to show that the imperative requirement to look into these things, to understand that the world you live in and the mechanisms that are being employed, and even more so the phone, the networking, the Metcalfe's law, right? The codified systems of networks and mimetic codified nodes of number transfer, and the mancy of taking information from one place to the other. That there is something, you get into Wilhelm Reich, and you get into this whole idea of orgone, generators, and sort of Faraday cages to protect yourself, these boxes that he comes up with, and right around similar time, you're looking at Vril energy, and this real close assimilation with Crowleyism and the OTO, and to look at these energetics, that this is a very real thing, and that the magician is conjuring and bringing up the technology, and that you really have to look at Elon Musk and look at his mother and see what an ugly old witch she is, and how instrumental she was. This takes us back to Michael Tsarion. You're always Melania, right? You're always missing the woman behind the man. You're always missing what this dipshit ends up inevitably deciding. And it's not every decision that this person makes. It's that one decision. You could say at the equinox, at this equatorial junction point. And a really good example is what happens around the precession, around the time of this Venus pentagram alignment every 8 years. That is, in fact, 13 revolutions by Venus. So automatically you're looking at 21 in the Phi or Phi or Fibonacci sequence, right? Where you're looking at these unequal asymmetrical halves, but they are these halves that are sort of split up, and they create this chasm, this window between 13 and 21. These 8 steps that I've identified in EPL many years ago as a representation of what some say was planet Maldek, and is now considered this asteroid belt, right? Where you have this localized solar system, but cosmic separation between this networking connectivity with the energetics from the zodiac that affect us through this push and pull and retrograde type mechanism, right? But during that time, during that cycle, I think it's 2030 is the next. So we're literally like halfway through to right now. And so it's not just that event when that happens, when it takes place. It's the culmination and the leading up. But particularly when you're looking at 3.5 to 4 years, you're talking about sort of revelations, like biblical revelations based half cycle that we have to look at. You have the Gauss sequence, right? You have the 101 on the way up, the 101 on the way down. You have the 1001 club. Right? There's a lot of things that have to be looked at here from a mathematical sense, that lead into philosophy, that leads into systems logic, that leads back into symbols and sigils and signs and energetics, that lead into amino acids, it's particularly like excitatory amino acids and aromatic amino acids that imbibe and generate, that conjure energetics from a light optic wave patterning perspective, and create these holograms through acoustic undulation and flux, right? And we're talking about the base reality generator that affects us each and every day, and the alliances and the conjuring that takes place through this mediumship, or this connection with codified systems, and that these rituals are actually creating a number system. Spell work is about all these aspects. Like the rituals always involve the physical ritualization. There's that sexual aura purification, and the purification is still involving the sexual energy. The abstinence from sexuality and the purification from sexuality only implies that, like pulling the string, right? That later, at another time, in another ritual, or further down the road, that what appears to be complete and total defilement or hedonistic desire isn't this aberrant ritualistic process, but it is a balancing out of the seasons and the cycles, right?